Hi, welcome to a second live stream where today I'm going to be discussing about how to design a new app and also how to code it in SwiftUI. This week, I'm going to try to analyze one pattern that I find really interesting, which is the bottom card UI. But also, there's this app that is really hot right now. It's called Clubhouse. And I was browsing the UI and I thought it was interesting the way they use it, which is a bit in line with where a lot of UIs in iOS is going. For example, I gathered some examples here. When you tap on a card, it opens the room. And if you create a new chat, it's going to open the bottom card UI. So that's how I call it. I don't know how you actually call it in the industry. For those who don't know what Clubhouse is, it's basically a social network for podcasters, if you will. It allows you to create rooms where people can just chat openly without being invited into a podcast with professional video settings, such as having a microphone. So it's really interesting. Imagine if you have Twitter and you can just create a channel where people can just chat. And then you have the channel creators who are the ones who are actually chatting and talking. What I find interesting about Clubhouse is that unlike Twitter and a lot of visual-based tools, Clubhouse is actually audio, which means that you can essentially close the app and do other things. You can multitask, you can listen that as a radio, and I think that creates a really interesting use case. So for a lot of designers, people wanting to learn in different topics, they can use this to listen to the stock market, they can listen to UI designers, iOS developers, while they do other things. So we're going to take a look at the UI, and I want to discuss about how we can take some of those great ideas from some of these UIs that we're going to look at. And as I mentioned before, this is not a new pattern. This is something that has been around for a long time. So if I look at the search in the Maps app, so for example, if you start always with the bottom card and then you search at the top here, you can drag to make it more maximized or not. The same with the music app. So you have this play bar, you click on it, and then it opens to full screen. You drag down, and then it dismisses it. And it seems that it's moving towards that direction as well, because if you look at when you add a widget, it's the same UI. So it's a card that slides from the bottom, and you navigate without losing perspective of and context of where you were, and you can just navigate to more widgets like that. It's really cool. It looks great. It's very functional because people tend to use the phone from the bottom. So you want to be able to easily take your thumb and navigate quickly the menu. So that's why the tab bar is so good. That's why the bottom card is so good. That's why you also see a lot of these buttons that comes from the bottom of the screens. You have these action buttons at the bottom instead of at the top, because at the top is very hard to reach. You have to actually hold the phone, and with the second hand, you have to tap on those buttons. So that creates an ease of use that is very interesting from a UX and UI perspective. And because of the popularity of gestures nowadays, so that pairs very well with the dismiss gesture, that you swipe down and you just dismiss the UI. So let me just minimize this first. And yeah, this is really interesting as well. The Stocks app has become incredibly more powerful over the years. Nowadays, you can look at the news at the same time that you're browsing stocks. So for example, if I'm browsing Apple stocks, I'm going to look at the news at the same time, and I can open the news app, and I can minimize and maximize. When I tap on one stock, it opens the stock, but also it opens the news at the bottom. So it's a very interesting pattern, and I want to explore with you in this live stream. So taking a look at the Clubhouse UI, if you've used it, you're going to find that it's very simple. It's very straightforward. Very simple colors, very simple structure. There's no hamburger menu. It's just you have the action buttons. So typically you would use a tab bar. And when you use a tab bar is when you have main navigation items, such as you want to explore, you want to search, you want to explore different categories. For example, on the App Store, you have the Today tab, and then you have the iOS apps, the iOS games. And so it's important to divide those different content into different tabs. But you can also use a different approach, which is more content approach, where your content is king. And in this case, especially for a social network, this is your main content. And this is the first thing you want to interact with. You don't want to necessarily start straight away with the separation of content, which is, hey, let's browse, hey, let's search. You want to go straight away to the content. So you have, okay, this is the latest rooms. These are the people you should follow. And this is, by the way, not necessarily a pattern that's going to be always there in the long run. This is good for when an app is just starting out and they want to invite a lot of people. They want to have this viral effect. So there's going to be this item that is very good for encouraging people to invite more people, to follow more people. It's a very good first-time user component. But the content itself, this is what I find interesting. So you scroll down, and then there's a bit of a gradient that blends into the background, and then you have the start room. So you've seen a lot of apps that actually have a main button at the bottom where you can create something, you can upload something, you can create a video. So a lot of those social networks, such as Instagram and TikTok, they will have these buttons at the bottom of the screen. In the middle, you tap on it and you create something. So this is very conventional. And then you have the navigation. But this is, I wouldn't call it a navigation. I would call it more a place where you can have items, notifications, and profile. So more and more I'm seeing the profile button to be on the top, both from Apple and from a lot of apps. It makes sense because you're used to it. You don't necessarily go there all the time, which is why it shouldn't be at the bottom of the screen, but it's there for the time that you need to log in, for the time you need to edit your account, you need to go to your settings. Same for the notifications. You don't necessarily want to go there all the time, but when you do have like new followers and such, you're gonna go to this, the calendar as well. So again, these items are not the things that you're gonna do all the time, which is why it's fine that they're at the top of the screen. And then you have a tab bar for items that you definitely want to navigate a lot. And then you have the action items. So when you go to a room, of course, you have the people who are talking right now, which is very important because you need to know who's talking, you need to know what they're saying, and you can, I don't know, different controls. I haven't really explored everything about Clubhouse, but I'm guessing that moderators have different controls from the normal users, and you have these plus actions, and you have a little bit of an animation showing that someone is speaking right now. So it's important that the content is there to give you the proper information, the right density of information. And of course, you want to be able to leave quickly because oftentimes you enter into a room and it's very, oftentimes when I go into a room, I leave quickly because maybe it's not interesting. I just wanted to give it a try. Maybe I also tap it by accident. So this is as important as closing, which is why you shouldn't always rely on just the gesture, but also have a visual button in which you can quickly dismiss that view. And then I'm guessing these are for saying hello and stuff like that. So again, this bottom card UI is in a lot of places, and it's a very new paradigm. So we're going to explore that. We're going to design that from scratch. And we're going to also look at what we call the square plus circle. So they call it the squircle. So the two words together. And it's basically a rectangle with smooth corners that looks like a circle. So that's what it is. And I'm going to show you how to make it. It's pretty simple, but it creates this very fun personality. Notice also the fonts is rounded. So interestingly, in iOS, you can also use SF Pro rounded. So I'm going to show that later. And yeah, it's good that they have this personality. The colors is different. So the background is not white. In a lot of iOS apps, it's completely white. It's good, or it's gray, so slightly off-white. But in this case, they're using a more brownish color, beige, and then they have the main brand color, which is green here. So very important for branding to set the tone and to be consistent. What I also like about some of the new approaches in a lot of new apps, to make it more friendly, they use a lot of emojis. So you're going to see a lot of categories represented by emojis. Product Hunt does that, TikTok does that, and Clubhouse does that. A lot of apps actually use emojis to express like the friendliness, and it just speaks to the younger generation, I believe. And it's always good to approach the widest audience possible. All right, so let's go into the execution. We're gonna quickly build something like this. Let me just start from scratch. So maybe not from scratch, so I can have some reference in case I mess up. But we're gonna create a new screen, and last time I used iPhone 11, and what I realized was that the iPhone 12 has a different resolution. It's actually 390 by 844. So I'm going to call this iPhone 12. Now, the difference in resolution doesn't make a big difference. It's just going to push more. The size of the items will still be the same. The magical number of 44, 60, and 88 will still apply the same. The only difference is that you have more space, meaning that these buttons will be pushed more to the right, etc. When you're designing for iOS, last time I mentioned about the UI kit, which unfortunately is only available in Sketch and XD, but you can also, there are a bunch of libraries that are available in Figma. Right now, they are in the community tab and it's in beta, so you have to be part of the beta, or I believe you can also link directly to the UI kit or the plugin to install those things. So the one I'm going to use is this iPadOS UI kit from Joey Banks, and you're going to duplicate it. If you have a team account, you're going to be able to use it as a team library, which is exactly what I'm going to do. So once you duplicate it, it's going to look like this, and you can explore different things like the colors and stuff like that. You can also have the textiles and the different colors in light mode and dark mode. It's very well thought out. But most importantly, you want to put this inside your library, for example. So if you put it inside your library, you're going to want to go to the assets, and you want to go to the libraries, and you want to publish it. Once you have it published, you're going to be able to use it as part of every new file that you have. So once you create a new file, you're going to be able to go here in assets, and you're going to be able to enable and disable it. Once you have it enabled, you're going to be able to use a lot of these items. So for example, I want to be able to use the status bar. So I'm going to bring the status bar for the iPhone 10. And this is a component, which means that you can easily sort of duplicate it, reuse in multiple places, change in one place. It's going to apply to all. But also, in modern components, if you have set it right, you can use AutoLayout, and you can also use constraints, which means that when you resize, it doesn't scale, and it actually just aligns things properly. So for example, if you have the padding that is consistent from the right, then it's always aligned to the right, regardless of how big the size might be. And so my iPhone 12 is bigger than the original 375, so I'm putting it to 390. And that's what I have, so I'm using that. You can also use like different things like color picker, really cool app clip. It's already built for you. You have some examples, you have the alerts, you have the share sheets. So instead of designing these from scratch, you have access to a library that is already well organized with adaptive layout and constraints and auto layout, and that's going to really speed your design. In this case, it's not necessarily a common, like a conventional UI, which is why I'm going to do it from scratch. We're not using the native navigation bar, as you can see here, but we are going to use SF symbols, because not every indie developers and designers are able to create their own icons. So typically you want to use an icon library such as SF symbols. So you would have to download this, and I mentioned it multiple times, by the way, in different places like my live streams, my SwiftUI handbook, my SwiftUI courses. So SF symbols, and you can download it from Apple, and you're going to be able to get the Mac app and get the code and use it in your SwiftUI project as well as in your Figma project. So once you have that, we're going to set the navigation menu, and let me start with what we call the squircle. So here I'm going to create the profile icon, and it's very simple. Again, the magic number is about 44, but maybe in the navigation bar it's a little bit too big. So because the navigation bar itself is 44, so items inside it should be smaller, and 36 or 32 should be a good number. So this is my avatar, and I'm gonna set the corner radius to be about 1/3 of the actual width and height. A little bit more than 1/3, so about 16. Now the goal here is that it shouldn't go to a point where it's a circle, and it should have a little bit of squareness, if you will, here. And let me make it black so that it's easy to see. And the second thing is you need to set the smooth corners of iOS. So as you can see, it makes the corners a little bit more playful. And especially here. So it's not exact as what they have. It's in SwiftUI it's going to be a little bit more circular-ish, but it's roughly what we have. And it creates this mix of circle and square at the same time. Now, speaking of plugins, I think it's also good to use some really good plugins from Figma, the community. And I'm going to go to community, and we're going to go to plugins. There are two really good ones that I use right now. There's a few, not just a few, not just two, but definitely Unsplash is a good one. There's also UI Faces. So you want to install this one. And what is great about this is that you can select a shape, and you're going to be able to command / and search for whatever command that you have in your plugin, in this case, UI Faces, and then you can apply the avatar directly. And this one takes a little bit of time, it's not perfect. I think the API call takes a little bit of time, but when it works great. Yeah. Okay, so I'm not having luck right now, even though it's Chinese New Year. Let me try to check this. Okay. But anyways, if things goes well, it actually applies the image to the shape. And this is not the only one. There's a bunch of also other plugins. But otherwise, I'm just going to copy the style and apply here like this. But I need to put back my squircle. So 14 and then set 60. Okay, let's set the SF symbols really quick. In these live streams, I definitely go faster than in my course. I try to take a lot of time doing each of these steps, but I want to make sure that we cover a lot of material in the live stream, which is why I'm going to go a little bit faster. So we have the bell, and you want to paste it here. The size of the SF symbol is very important as well. So typically it's 17 or 20. If you want to be friendlier, you make it bigger. So this is about 22 to 24. But typically in iOS, it's about 20 for the tab bar, for the nav bar, or even 17. So let's create some more. I want to make sure. Okay, so calendar, mail, and search. So I'm going to do email or mail. So I'm going to use this one. You can just copy and paste the symbol right away. And as you can see, it's pretty beautiful. Apple really does a good job at making these resources so accessible to everyone. And then we have the search. So that's it. Now let's talk about padding. We're going to set either 16 or 20 from the sides. And we're going to set 20 as well here. I'm going to set this as auto layout. So first I'm going to set it to group and then set auto layout. Now auto layout has this new feature where you can align it and set the direction just like a flex box in CSS. And here I'm going to set to center. And then you have the spacing between the items, just like the VStack, HStack in SwiftUI. You can set it to 16. What I love about auto layout is that it's so easy to use compared to constraints, for example. It takes a bit of time to get used to it. All right, so 20. And we have a bunch of icons. I think I'm missing one. I don't know where it went. The calendar one, I don't know. But another thing that I love about auto layout is that I can just copy and paste and into the layout itself. This is another dangerous thing, is you have to make sure that you are inside the frame. And right now, this auto layout is not inside the frame. Make sure that it's well organized. And here I select the frame and paste. Whoops, I don't know why it's not. Okay, paste here. It was working before. I don't know why it's not working anymore. Let me see. That's weird. But you can duplicate it. Design tools evolve too fast sometimes. I used to be able to just paste it into auto layout and it just adds into a new row or a new column. So let me just do it like this then. All right, and hopefully this feature where you can move with your keyboard keys is still valid. That's good. And 20, okay. Constraints, yes, you want to set this to top right and this one to top left. When you set the constraints right, it does like this. The same for the status bar. You want to set the constraints. If it's supposed to take the full width of the screen, you want to use left and right instead of just left or right. So like this, it adapts. That's beautiful. All right. What else can I show? Yeah. It's a very simple UI. So I'm just going to do this very quickly. You have a bunch of squircles. I have a hard time saying this word. But you have this one, which is slightly bigger. And then we're going to... If you want to resize an element, as you can see, when you resize, the rounded corners are kept the same. So oftentimes when you resize an element, especially if you want to also scale the rounded corners, the drop shadows, and the outline, you want to use K. So you press K, it switches to the scale tool instead of the move tool. So you have the move tool and the scale tool. So if you press K, it's also going to scale, K is also going to scale the rounded corners. And so I'm going to do that. Let's say I'm going to set to 44. And then you have a bunch of avatars that are slightly smaller using scale again. And then maybe a smaller one. So to make it more playful, and you select all of these, and you apply all the avatars at once. So UI faces, and apply avatar. Let's hope that it works. Yes, finally it does. So all the shape at the same time, apply the avatar, and boom, it applies to all of them. So just want to make sure it's not too small, otherwise it's very hard to see. And of course you can add like the icon, the plus, and stuff like that. Now let's talk about typography. So in this case, I'm going to use SF Rounded. It comes for free in iOS. So instead of SF Pro Text or SF Pro Display, you're going to use SF Pro Rounded. And another thing I want to mention is that using SF symbols, you can mix and match with the text. You don't need to separate it. And that's another beautiful thing about SF symbols. So for example, you have this button here, and you can essentially put the text next to the icon without having to separate the two. So I can put find more people, and I can set it to 17. I'm going to create my button. This one is slightly smaller because it's less important than the creation button. So this one is going to be bigger, and this one is going to be smaller. As you can see, there's a visual hierarchy, which is very important as well in design, excuse me. You need to know what is the priorities in which you want people to interact with your UI. So when you put a color, it gives a higher priority. When you put something that blends more with the background, it's a lesser priority. And you also want to set lighter colors in front and darker colors in the background. So that's exactly what this UI is trying to do. If it deemed this part to be more important than this, it would have added a color here and instead of here. And that's just how you play with visual hierarchy. So I'm going to try to use AutoLayout with these two. Okay, so if you select the shape plus the text, it's going to automatically create a button for you. And then you can, from there on, you can set the padding instead, and it's going to set the size. So for example, I'm setting it to horizontal or vertical. And you can also, with the new system, you now have the ability to set the padding individually for each part. Before, it had to be very specific. So now I can set different padding from the top. So let's say 12 from the top, 12 from the bottom. And now it creates a height of 40. So maybe I want to set 8 and 8. So that gives me 32. And then I'm going to create my squircle. We have 32, and you don't want it to be too like a pill shape. And there you go. So this is my button. I'm going to make sure that it's symmetrical so that it's easy to scan the UI. As you can see here, Apple used this kind of new style button a lot. This is what Apple use like traditionally a lot, but more and more when you have these rounded corners, when we're moving more towards having a common iPhone, which is the iPhone 10 with the big rounded corners, more and more UIs are trying to adapt to the big rounded corners of the iPhone, which is why right now there's a bit of a mix of the two. That's because the old iPhones that don't have the big rounded corners are still very much present, and there's an evolution of the style that is going gradually rather than doing it all at once, which is why sometimes you're going to see these big button with these smooth corners, and sometimes you're going to see these buttons with smaller corner radius. And so let's talk about the background here. So typically you want the background to be darker than whatever foreground element that you have. So you can set this color here, the HSB, which allows you to set also the brightness. So I can set it to 92, for example, or 95, depending on how much contrast that you want against your content. And if you have a background that is darker, then you can actually use white to contrast with that, like this. And if you want more contrast, then you can set maybe 92 instead. So now you have more contrast against this button here. Of course, you can also use drop shadows to add even more contrast if you want, but that's entirely up to you. And the most important thing is that you fulfill your goal and you make sure that you have hierarchy. So for example, I can set 10 and I can make it more subtle, either 10 or 5 or 15. I can mix between having multiple drop shadows or not, or I can just not have any drop shadow, and that's fine as well. So let me just organize this a little bit. It looks a bit like there's a lot of negative spacing for no reason, so I'm just gonna set this to be a little bit better. Okay, now let's talk about the card. So now I'm gonna create a card, and we're gonna set, let's say 20 or 30. And again, we want the card to be more important than the background, so I'm gonna set this to white. The spacing, we want to align it. So 20 from the left, I'm gonna be consistent there. All right. Okay. And then we have the content. So you have a bunch of titles. I'm gonna go a little bit faster here. The text takes a little bit of time, so I'm just gonna copy and paste this. So I have a bunch of text, and it's important to set the hierarchy in your text as well. A lot of people make the mistakes of setting everything to black. And if I set everything to black, you're gonna see that it doesn't feel like there's hierarchy. So a solution to that is to use the font weight and also the font color. So I can set opacity to 70%, for example. So I know that this title is the most important thing. This is the category or the group or the channel. And these are the people that have joined the channel. And then I'm going to bring a bunch of, it's important to have some visuals, so avatars are good for that. And there you go. And now we have to deal with the text here. So I'm going to align this to the middle. It's important to anticipate the content as well. Sometimes these names can be very long. In this case, we don't have very long name, but we can very much have long names. And sometimes you add like icons next to it to show that the person is talking. So you can do something like that. And here, to make sense of this, you can, of course, you have the spacing from the top. Again, the spacing divided by 4, in this case 16. I can also set it to 20. The bigger the elements are, the more you can set the spacing to be bigger. So let's say I'm going to be consistent with 20, and this element here is going to be centered with text center. This is all text, by the way, including the number plus the SF symbol. So that's really cool. It does a really good job at aligning the baseline of the icon versus the text, and that's very useful. Now, here I can also set my structure for auto layout. So for example, I can group these together and I can set auto layout here. So we have consistent spacing. So for example, this is going to be 8 or this is going to be 12. And I'm going to set this together. This doesn't have to use auto layout because it's overlaying each other, and auto layout is not typically good for that. But I can definitely group these together and then set auto layout between these two. Okay. And here the spacing is 16. That's great. And then finally, so let's say this is 8. So I'm going to group these together because the spacing is different from these two groups. This is a group, and I'm also going to set auto layout. And finally, we have 3 elements now, and we can set auto layout as well. Sometimes the auto layout doesn't appear, and in those cases, you would want to go with the container, or you can group them first, like this, and set auto layout. Now, once you have auto layout, I think if they haven't changed it, you can individually set the alignment of the element. And I also want this to be auto layout with the background. So hopefully this is going to work. So I'm going to select this whole element here and select the background and group them together and then set auto layout. What is beautiful is when it works, the background is set automatically for you. And therefore, as long as the content fits, it's going to automatically set the size perfectly using the padding that you want. And you can also, of course, set a fixed padding, a fixed size, like 350. And then you can center the elements like this, or in the middle like this. And you can also center the element individually. So I'm guessing this is this, and I'm able to, okay, so I cannot align it individually. Let me see. Okay, so I guess this can work by setting the container to take the full width and using the font alignment to align the font. So this is one way to go about it. But as you can see, this is it's very flexible. And I always want my layout to be as flexible as possible. So if I have more content, for example, I have a completely different content, then I can set a different text. Let me bring some different text here. Like this. So you can see that it allows me to push the height of the container like this. And I want to set, typically, if you're able to code, you should do it in code, of course. But if you're working with engineers and they're doing the coding part, you definitely want to organize this firsthand. And the line height should be about 30, so 150%. But depending on the size of the title, sometimes it doesn't work. In this case, I don't want 150%. So something like 22 or even the same number as the actual font size works in this case. So as you can see, this definitely works. And if you can also set like a maximum, so a fixed width for your title. And this makes a lot of sense because my title can be multi-lines. So when you have multi-line like this, then it makes sense to have a fixed number. Because at the end of the day, you want everything to align beautifully. Like this. So you want this text to align with this text as well. And that's why you need to play with your design as much as you can so that it looks something that you can easily scan as you look into it. Now, we also have the gradient at the bottom. So I can definitely set a gradient here. Linear gradient, and I'm setting like a slight fade. And with that slight fade, I can set a new button. So let me just use this one. It's also a good idea to create a component and be able to reuse it. The bigger your button, the bigger the font should be. So this one can definitely be 15, for example. Make sure that after using AutoLayout, make sure that the size, which is influenced by the content, remains the same. So you're gonna have to tinker with that. Here, I definitely want my button to be 44, so I might set more padding. And it's going to be from the top. Oop. No, the padding here doesn't work. So this is the spacing between elements, not the same. I'm gonna go to the padding here, so set it to 12, and 12, now I have 40. I can definitely set, I think 12 is good. Yeah, I can set 13 or 14. Or I can make the font to be bigger. So that's the two options that I have. So let's say 20, 12, 12, and maybe I can make the font bigger in this case. So now I have 40. I wonder. Or I can also set a fixed size. In this case, 44, center, and the element is going to be center in the middle like this. So those are different ways you can design. And here I'm gonna set to maybe 20 on each side. The new AutoLayout in Figma definitely have more control. It's also a little bit more complex for sure. It used to be a lot simpler, but you had less control. That's the price to pay. Otherwise, 20 here, so we have this kind of style that we want, and the color. Now, this is where your brand comes in, right? Gray is easy, or white, that's easy. It can fit any brand. But if you want to add a little bit more personality, you can definitely go towards, you know, blue or purple or like this. So you can see when I look here, it feels like a different app just because of the background. And on top of that, I can also use this for the branding to add more personality to my app. So I can use the color styles, which is here in Figma. And this is when you enable the design library that I use from variants here. And you can see that they have the iOS colors. They have the light mode and dark mode. So for example, I can use red. I can use blue, light blue, and blue, which is the iOS. So I can also use purple, which fits a little bit better with the background. Typically, if you use the color here, it's the same hue as the background color. So that's one way to try to make the colors right if you're not too experienced. More experienced designers, they can mix and match different types of colors and it's still gonna look great. So for example, here we're mixing beige with green. So it requires a little bit more experience, but if you have less experience with colors, try to match the hue together. So for example, I have purple and slightly purple here, or blue works well with most. And when I say hue, this, like the first value here for HSB, so blue is roughly like 220. So this is more blue and it's gonna work well with any color, or you can use gray, which also works well with any color. So 0 saturation would be gray, 10 saturation would be slightly tinted, or 5. And a lot of people ask me, like, how do you set neutral tones? This is a neutral tone. A neutral tone is a background color that is not supposed to steal the attention. It's just there to set the ambiance of your design. It's just there to set as a background and nothing more than that. Because I see a lot of designers, it's not wrong to do that, but it definitely requires more experience to do that. So for example, if I was to use a vibrant color, so for example, I'm gonna use, I don't know, purple. It's not that it's wrong to do this. It's just that it requires a little bit more experience to work well with it. And it does steal a lot of attention. It does force you to restructure some of the visual hierarchy in your design, which is why if you don't feel confident, just go with a more neutral tone. For example, let me give you some example of what I need to adjust here. First of all, I need to decide, clearly this is not working anymore, so I might have to set like another color, such as yellow or red, depending on the color of the red. And clearly this black here doesn't work anymore. It doesn't offer enough contrast at this point. So I might want to go with white. And those are some of the decisions that you have to make when you're making such a drastic change to your design. And like I said, if you're not sure, just go with a more neutral tone. But it's not less beautiful any less. It's just, you just need to restructure it. Just like in your code, when you change a system, you have to restructure your code. You have to refactor your code so that your code makes sense afterwards. Okay, so we have this design. I'm just gonna keep the blue just to make it as a good example, as an example of what I can do. I'm gonna keep the other one, which is more neutral, here. I'm gonna share the source files, for example. By the way, as I do with all my live streams, I share the design files and the SwiftUI files. So here, I'm gonna I can set it to 70% or 60%. And yeah, obviously you want to set different avatars. Okay, I still know my shortcuts. That's good. I have to switch a lot between the design tool and the coding tools, and sometimes I just confuse a lot, and that's why I want to make sure that I have the shortcut keys correctly. Let's see. Okay. Now, this as well, like, you might want to switch this to a white text. So let me make sure that they do have an option to set to light. So this is a great thing about variants, is that you can set the overrides of your components. So for example, here I can set to dark, and it's going to change my variants based on that. And here you also have the type. such as the microphone, the video active, the recording, and the phone. And so those are really cool features that I should explore in the next live stream, but for now, let's not get too complicated. Let me create a new screen, and this is where we're gonna create the bottom card that is sliding from the bottom. And yeah, one thing that I do feel like it's gonna make your life a little bit harder with the auto layout is that when you're creating a new element and you want to drag on top of it, it's going to try to put inside the auto layout. There are some techniques that helps with that. For example, I think you have to press space, but I keep forgetting about this, honestly. So when I press space and I drag, it doesn't get into auto layout anymore. And of course, you can also lock the elements. So for example, you click on the lock icon, and then you're going to be able to drag this freely like this. But once it's locked, just need to understand that it's not clickable anymore, or it's not editable anymore. Don't forget that. So those are the pros and cons of using auto layout. I try to not spend too much time in the design tool so I can get into the coding but as soon as possible, and to validate the ideas that I have in my head. Now I'm gonna set this to 30, and obviously this is going to be white. By the way, the corner radius you can set individually. So for example, it's nice, like a small detail here, but when you click like the corner radius of the icon, so you click here, this is the bottom, I'm gonna set to 0, and this is the bottom left, I'm gonna set to 0. Small little details that we designers just appreciate so much. All right, so this is my bottom card UI, and I want to also mention that if you want to make it seen that it's draggable, you want to add this little handle here. This is what we call Skeuomorphism 2.0. A lot of people hate that term, but it's just what it is. You're replicating real life to show that, to make it more friendly, and without explaining anything, we have icons and we have these visual cues that really tells you that this is draggable. And there you go. So that's why Apple puts this everywhere. They put it at the bottom here to tell people that you can drag it from the bottom to dismiss this app. You have this little handle here to tell people that you can drag it down to dismiss that view. Which is why sometimes when you have this, you can omit the close button on the top right. And you can see here, Apple didn't add a close button here, but it did here. So some inconsistencies, some rules are meant to be broken. You can't always follow all the rules all the time. But generally speaking, the handle here is to tell you that this can be dragged. So that's what I'm doing right now. And I'm centering, and there you go. And so here I'm going to put my content. Another interesting thing that I thought about this new UI paradigm is that when you go to that bottom card, suddenly the top menu changes. And that's beautiful because you never want to waste space. Okay? For example, here you're wasting a little space. This makes sense because there's a lot of context going on, but you can also leverage that wasted space or that space to do something else. So for example, Clubhouse decided to show this document thing and show the list of rooms. I'm not sure, I haven't used it, but Apple in their Stocks app shows the different tickers when you go into the full mode versus not full mode, it shows the title. So instead of going full mode and then showing only the title, it goes to full mode and it shows the tickers of your other stocks. So those are different creative ways that you can do with your design to make it more useful and to make it more impactful and to not waste the space that you have in front of you. So in this case, it's creating this it has different options. So here maybe I can create like a new icon, such as in document. That's on top of my head right now. And this one, I don't know, can be close button, or in that case it was a chevron going down, and then you have the text. So let me just align it to the left, and I can't think right now, so I'm just going to use the same as the one from Clubhouse. So there you go. Like I have a contextual menu. I'm keeping the profile icon because it's very important, probably to me or to my design. But I can also use this. Oftentimes what I see a lot, people use that space to do the share button, which is also a very nice option to have in your app. Let me make sure. I don't know why you can't copy and paste anymore into AutoLayout. Okay. I'm going to duplicate first and then paste. There you go. Yeah, so I'm using this is more contextual, and then you also notice that they're adding some buttons to the left and to the right, so depending on the amount of navigation buttons that you have. But to do it on the bottom makes a lot of sense as well. And when you don't have, you can definitely use SF symbol here as well, like this. So now you can have different icons, different menu items at the bottom of your UI, and then you have your conversation here, and that's that. Now let's get into SwiftUI, shall we? All right, I'm gonna try. I'm already using what, 50 minutes, so let's see how much I can get into the UI. This is what I prepared, and this is like the basic stuff, but there are some interesting techniques. So we're gonna get there. It's very simple, and this was prepared like in 15 minutes. SwiftUI is just beautiful. So we have the navigation here. We have a number of cards that we're repeating multiple times, and I'm putting them into components because I want to quickly put them into a single file. It's easier to teach in this way. And we have our navigation that is sticking to the top. So I'm using a Z stack for that. I'm also ignoring the save area. I'm putting, and then I have a transition of the bottom card. So when I click on an item, it transitions from the bottom. I was going to add gesture. So let's see if in the end we have enough time to do that. But let me just delete everything and start from scratch. So wish me luck here. It's Chinese New Year, so hopefully I'm gonna get some luck here. All right, so we're gonna start with a text element, and just to prove that I'm not cheating, you're gonna see that this is the UI. So my title, and there you go. I'm not gonna play it right now because there's no interaction. Let me make sure that I can switch quickly to Figma. I'm going to start with the navigation because it's very easy to do in SwiftUI. And I want to talk about SF symbol at the same time. So let's start with SF symbol. Without even installing anything or importing anything, I can just use image, system name, and then this is the string of my SF symbols. If this is Bell, I can just go to SF symbol, and search for the icon that I want. So there's a shortcut where you can copy the name, because this is the name that we need for SwiftUI to be able to use that icon. And Apple does all the work for us. Typically you go to edit and you copy the name, but there's a shortcut which is Shift Command and C. So Shift Command and C to copy the name and then paste right away. And there you go, you have my icon. I didn't have to do anything else. And if I want to set the font size, I'm going to set the font modifier. I'm going to set to system, and I'm going to choose size which is, let's say, 20. I also have, the option to change the image scale, for example. I can set to large or medium or small. That's up to you. In this case, I don't need that. If I want to use a multicolor icon, I'm going to go to the multicolor tab, and I'm going to enable my multicolor, which means that I have access to these icons with colors. And it depends on your design, but let's say you have the paper plane one, or so Command Shift and C, and I paste it here. By default, it's just black. So if I want to set its original, I believe, or color, I don't remember the name, but it's something about, I have to use the modifier. I need to search for it. I'm gonna come back to this one, but I don't remember the modifier. Maybe I can look into the list here. So image rendering mode. Okay, I always forget about this modifier. It's rendering mode original. Now, when you're using this, make sure that it's directly applied after image. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And when you do this, it's using the original color, as you can see here. But otherwise, you don't have to use it. In this case, I'm not going to use it. But SS symbols is so cool. Now, I'm going to create a H tag. This is going to allow me to spread horizontally, and I can certainly copy and paste multiple times like this. I can also apply the font size to all of them at the same time by applying on an H tag instead. So it makes my code a little bit cleaner. Of course, there's a bit of a cost there, meaning that all the icons will have to have that font size, and whatever other items is going to have that font size. So let's take a look at the other icons that I use. So we have the bell, we have the calendar, mail, and search. So calendar. All right, so let me do this real quick. Calendar, mail, this one, and then we have the search. There you go. Boom, we have all the icons, didn't have to do anything. If I want to push, I'm going to use a spacer. Boom, that's it. And now I'm going to add a padding. Okay, and so now I have a 16 padding by default, otherwise I can set it to 20. Just like in the design. I also want to set spacing of, let's say, 8 or even 16. 16 is good because you want to have enough space between the icons because they're tappable, so you don't want to accidentally tap them. And finally, we have the avatar. Now, for the avatar, you want to export the images. If you're not using transparency, you're just going to export them in JPEG. And you want to export them at 3x the resolution at the minimum because it's not going to look great on the iPhone 12, for example, because it's a 3x density. And so I'm going to export these at 3x in JPEG, and I'm going to drag and drop them to assets catalog. I already did that. And I'm going to be able to reference that here. Now, what I can do is go to insert menu. I can also go to my menu here. So drag and drop, and voila. The other thing I can do is I can also use image literal. So image literal. And by doing this, it's just beautiful because I can see the picture right away inside the code. And that's really cool. So I can set this to a frame of, I believe, 36 and 36. And I need to make this resizable. Otherwise, it's going to take the original size of the image. And I'm going to make this into a square plus circle. So I'm gonna do that by doing clip shape, rounded rectangle, corner radius and style. I'm gonna set it to 14. Continuous is that smooth corner that Apple use in a lot of places. So this is what I need to do. I need to clip using a round rectangle with a corner radius and the style of that very smooth corners. And that's how I get my shape. I can even set it to 16. So you can't see it very well here, but I have my beautiful playful state shape that's not exactly a circle and it's not exactly a square neither. So that's what we have. What else I wanted to show? So now I have my layout here, and I want to put this inside a V-stack so I can push it to the top like this. So now it's at the top. I'm creating a custom navigation view. Now for those who are starting out in iOS development, maybe this is not the best route to create a custom layout like this. It's fun. If you have a team of engineers, this is great. They're going to be able to take care of it. But if you're an indie developer or a designer who codes, maybe you want to make it a little bit easier and just use a navigation view instead, which is all prepared for you. And it's all adaptive. It's all cross-platform. But I'm showing this because I think it's important that designers also know how to create a custom layout, but it's definitely not always the best solution. So I have my custom navigation bar here, and I want to create a card. So first of all, I want to show you that I can also use a Z-stack. So I'm going to use a Z-stack. A Z-stack allows you to overlay elements on top of another instead of spreading it horizontally or vertically. So my Z-stack is going to allow me to have a background color. For example, I'm going to set color literal. Now I can use the any background that I want. So I can use these, or I can use colors from my assets catalog, where I can create colors from the assets as well. This is all explained in my course if you're interested. But otherwise, let's say I have this, and I can also set the foreground color to .white, which is going to apply to all my icons at the same time. That's beautiful. Because I'm using essentially a font icon, which is the SF symbol, I can just change the colors for free. And it's just very easy and very flexible. On top of that, I want to make sure that it's taking the full size, so I'm going to use ignore save area. By default, it's going to ignore on all sides. And now I have my Z stack, and I also want to have a content. Now the Z stack, you can set the alignment to top, but the thing is, it's not going to work here. And it does work because the size of my stack. Okay, but typically you need to make sure that the elements inside, because they have to align with each other. Just like a V stack and an H stack, they're aligning against each other. So you need to make sure that whatever element that you have inside is going to take the full space. And I guess what helped was because I have a color, and the color is taking the maximum width and height, it's pushing everything, and therefore it allows me to align everything using the Z-stack alignment. So if I didn't have this, it wouldn't allow me to align it. So you can see it's back to the middle. And that's because my shape here, which is a color, is taking the maximum width and height. And that allows me to align everything to the top at once. So that's the beauty of it, and you need to understand all of these logics behind, otherwise you're going to be very confused. But yes, so this color element allows me to align within my Z-stack. And now I'm going to put underneath the navigation and above the color. But first of all, I like to be able to extract a subview. Typically, I create a new file and I create a new view. But for the sake of this demo, to make it less confusing, I'm going to call this top bar, and using extract subview, rename both at the same time and reference it like this. Now I can focus on my new code. I have my Z stack, my background, my top bar, and the spacer is useless in the Z stack, by the way. So I don't need that anymore. The spacer was useful to push when I was in the V stack, but in this case, because I switch it to a Z stack, I don't need it anymore. And then I'm gonna do the cards. So I'm gonna start with the elements. All right, so we have a bunch of text here. Text, and then another text. Okay, and then you want to put, so as you can see, when you are inside a Z stack, they just overlay each other. But once you group this inside a V stack, it does not overlay anymore between these two texts, like this. So now it's a V stack. It's spreading vertically. And then I'm going to set, let's say, a background color dot white. And I want to make sure that this is taking the maximum width. So I'm going to use frame max width dot infinity and max height to, let's say, 300. And I'm going to set the corner radius. So I'm going to use clip shape, rounded rectangle, corner radius, style continuous. I'm going to add an extra padding. And there you go. So this is good for adaptiveness. And then I'm going to put this inside a scroll view. First of all, I'm going to embed into a VStack, change that into a scroll view. So now my element is going to be scrollable, but my scroll view is not, for some reason, I'm not sure why it's doing this. So VStack, let me just play this. Okay, I have my max height, the scroll view. I'm gonna get back to scroll view because right now I don't know why. Okay, so I have my stack here, and let me align things properly. We have 3 text, we have 2 avatars, and we have a 4th text. I want to align this to the left first. Using a VStack, I can align to the leading so that the both text is going to be to the left. Now, as I mentioned before, everything is aligning to based on the size of the child elements, which is why you want to have at least one of the elements to take the full width. And in this case, as I mentioned before, just like in the design tool, you want this to have a fixed width as well, or to take the maximum width so that it pushes everything and aligns everything at the same time. And we're going to do exactly the same in SwiftUI. So I'm going to set frame max width dot infinity. And by doing this, see, by doing this, it aligns everything to the left. But the other thing that is confusing is when you create a frame that is max width, the text itself is centered to the middle, which is why you also need to align the text within the frame to leading. And now this is perfect. So as a result, I can set a padding, and now it's everything aligned. And if I want to push everything to the top, I'm going to use a spacer like this. So the rest, of course, right now I have my navigation bar that is on top of that. So for the moment, I'm just going to push everything a little bit using padding. This is a quick fix. So I'm going to set to 80 for now. And the padding, let me set it to 20. And this is where you should always use dynamic type. This is why in all my designs, if you're using a design system from from one of the UI kits, try to set your text to use dynamic type as much as possible. So in this case, you can see that from there I have like caption 1, caption 2, title 1, etc. And you want to use those because you can match them in SwiftUI later on. And you want to use dynamic type because it's going to allow you to be very accessible. People are going to be able to customize their font size based on their preferences in settings. So a lot of people do that increasingly as our users are getting more and more from a wide audience. Therefore, dynamic type and accessibility are really hot topics that every single designer and developer should care about. And so when you design, try to use dynamic type as much as possible. So in this case, for example, this is the size of 20, and the closest, the value is there. Let me see. Okay, they do have a lot. So they do have different accessibility settings. For example, you have large default. I haven't gone into as much detail, but what I want is something as close as possible to 20. So you can see that title 3 is actually 20 in terms of font size, so I can use that. Now I just need to apply the bold. But yeah, that's another thing about doing it in Figma is that sometimes, first of all, it doesn't work with custom fonts such as rounded. We don't have, the design was set for that UI kit was set to use SF Pro display and SF Pro text. So I'm going to have to remember these dynamic type settings. So if it's 20, it's title 3, which means going back to the SwiftUI, I'm going to set font and title 3. And there you go. But the one that I want to set is this one, the second text, and not the first one. And I also want to set bold. So it's a lot more flexible in code for sure. And if I want to set the opacity, I can either set opacity like this, or I can use a color opacity. And this is good when you have like multiple elements that you want to apply, but you just want to apply opacity to the color. So you're going to do something like foreground color and color.white.opacity to 0.7. This is more flexible for sure. And this is not white. Another thing that I want to mention is you should use the system colors as much as possible because it adapts to dark mode as well. So you want to use primary, but typically you don't need to use primary because by default, primary is set everywhere. Let me set the background to be a little bit lighter. But yeah, I can set very light background, very dark background. That's really up to you. You just need to make sure that to contrast well with the SF symbols. Okay. You also want to make sure that you have proper spacing. So spacing, let's say 8. Okay, I'm a little bit stretching my time, so I'm gonna skip some parts such as overlaying, but you can definitely copy and paste like this. I'm gonna show you a really fun thing that I learned. So I have my avatar here that I am adding here. I can definitely add it here as well. But see, let's say I have two avatars that I want to overlay on top of each other, just like in the design. So you're overlaying two avatars on top of each other. And if you want to do that in SwiftUI, it's a beautiful overlay modifier. So I can essentially do this like an inception overlay, and then inside the overlay, I just paste the other avatar. Now, right now it's sitting on top of each other, so I can use .offset, and I can use X20, Y20 like this. And there you go. It's just two avatars on top of each other. And I can use image literal like this to change between the avatars that I want to use. Super fun. And obviously, you can also create an Actually, a better way to do this. Let me create a component first. I won't be able to customize the image unless I set the variables, but I can definitely create like a sub view, and I can name this, let's say, avatar view, and set the overlay avatar view. So it's gonna make my code cleaner, and then set the offset x 20 y 20. So if you're reusing a lot of the same code, you can definitely do this. And of course, you can set variables for your components. So for example, you can set var image of type image, and you can replace this with image. I'm gonna set the default, so image UI image literal, and we're gonna select one of these, and this should work. Cannot convert of type image. This is okay. It's already. So if it's already of type image, or I can just set it instead. It's an image literal, so I'm gonna set it like this. There you go. So the type is gonna be an image literal. It's fun. SwiftUI. You can be playful like that. So if I set it like this, because I'm already setting my image literal here by using image UI image. If I was going the other way, I would have to do it like this, image directly. This would work. But I can also be more playful, and I can just put the image literal like this. See, it's funny because I'm just copy and pasting the image. Okay, hopefully. Whoops. No, of course. It's an equal sign. All right, so that's two ways to go about it. Now I can customize the person. So using my avatar view here, I can set image and then my image literal, which I'm gonna paste the person. Isn't that fun? SwiftUI is so much fun. So this works. It makes the code fun as well to look at. You want to make your code as readable as possible. And by making it this short, it's just so easy, so beautiful, and so customizable and powerful at the same time. So this is how I manage to overlay two avatars on top of each other in SwiftUI. So next, I want to show you how to set the thing on top. First of all, I can definitely create this into a component. So this whole card is going to be a component. So I'm going to set extract subview. Let's name it card view. Okay. As a result, okay, maybe I created too much here. Okay, so I have this padding here that I definitely don't want to add there. And then I'm going to repeat this multiple times. Like this. And I want to put this inside a VStack first. There you go. So I was able to repeat it multiple times. Instead of a VStack, hopefully this is going to work. The scroll view. There you go. And I have some extra padding here that's going on. So I might want to set only the padding horizontally, and vertically I want to set less padding. So padding dot vertical and set it to 8. So now I have less padding between the items. All right. Because I have a scroll view, this is now scrollable. I just need to have a background for my nav bar. So let's do that. the tab bar, I have a foreground. I'm gonna set a background. The background is gonna be the same color as my UI background. So let me just copy this and put that for background view. So flexible. I love how flexible SwiftUI is. There you go. We just have this little extra. So again, I'm creating a custom nav bar, which is why we have these weird issues that I wouldn't have if I was just using a navigation view. But it's fun. We're learning something. What I'm gonna do here, I'm gonna set, it has to be on top of the content for sure. So it has to be here. I'm gonna set a color. Let me just copy this. I hope you're having fun watching this. I love experimenting during live streams as well, going off course, which is why like I'm sweating right now. So I want to set height to 0 and okay. And also I want to set ignore save area to .all and only the top. Wait, let me just look at the blue lines because I'm a bit confused here. So where is my, it was working before. Say, let me set this, maybe it's the save area that's, let me set it to another color. It was working. Okay. That's the color, and I cannot find my color. Frame height 0. If I set to 100, it's going to the top. Oh, because I want to ignore the save area and okay, if this is not working, I'm gonna move on. All right, it's working now. So 0. Why wasn't that working before? Oh, never mind. It has to. Okay, it's working. There you go. So now I can put back the same color. Boom. There you go. I have a custom navbar and I don't have the problem with this edge, this notch area here. So let's finish this live stream with the little interaction with the bottom card UI. First of all, we're going to create a bottom card UI. Let me set a round rectangle, corner radius 30, continuous. Right now it's black. And I'm going to make it white. So I'm going to set fill color.white. And this needs to set ignore save area from the bottom so that it's going to take the space of the bottom as well. .all .bottom. And I also want to set some padding from the top. So .top, let's say 100 for now. And there you go. So this is my new view that is supposed to be there. And let me make it a little bit more. $80. It's up to you, but this is customizable. And let me add a little bit of drop shadow. And also let me also make it conditional, meaning that it's only going to show when I'm going to tap on something. First of all, I need to make sure that this start right here. So I'm going to cheat a little bit for the purpose of this demo. I'm going to add padding. So let's see, I have my scroll view and I have my for each. So I think I'm going to add the padding on the scroll view. Not the bottom, but definitely the top. Okay. Yeah, that's the fun of having a custom navbar. You have to figure out all of these things. But it does work, and it starts here. And I want to show my new view. which start right here. I can even add some drop shadow because I love drop shadows. Color.black, and we can set it to 20, 0, and then 10 or 0. Obviously black is way too much, so I'm gonna set opacity 0.3. Okay, this looks a lot better now. So you can see that this is a new bottom card that is coming from the bottom, and I'm going to make it show using a transition. First of all, I'm gonna set a state var show is equal to false, and this is my new view. I'm gonna set a condition. If show, if it's equal to true, then show it. So what's going to happen here is that when I tap one of these cards, it's going to show the new UI. So I'm going to add on tap gesture, show is equal to true. So when I do this and tap on it, it shows, but I need a way to dismiss it. I need to also do another on tap gesture, show is equal to false. There you go. Obviously, you can apply this on a close button, but I just want to shorten this presentation. So what else? A transition. So if I want to set a transition, I'm going to set dot animation. Let's set it to spring. And I want to set a transition. The transition has to be on the first child element of the show condition. So opacity. This is supposed to work. Move edge bottom. Okay, it works. So the beautiful thing about the transition is that you can use a lot of these preset animations, such as move, such as opacity, which I don't know why it's not working right now. Maybe it's too fast because of the spring animation. So maybe that's why. And you can also set like the duration for your animation. This is the kind of thing that is just so much fun to work to play with these settings. And as a designer, you should not ask your developer to do this part for you. You should be the one who plays with these things, because you're the one who knows your design. You're the one who knows how you want to design it, how you want to animate it. It's all in your head. The question is, how do you want to execute that? And that's why you should learn SwiftUI. And as you can see, animation is not working for some reason, so I'm gonna have to get back into that later. But for some reason, the move animation works, and I can set it from the bottom. I can set it from trailing as well. But notice that when I dismiss it, it goes straight away to the back. And that's because of the show condition. The solution to this is to set a z index to 1. So it's always going to be on top, which means that when I dismiss, it's just beautiful like that. So bottom card animating from the bottom like this. You can play with the animation. I love to play with the spring values. Spring here, response, damping fraction, 0.5, 0.7. Definitely play with these numbers. The blend duration is not necessary. And you're going to see it's going to bounce more. So the more that you set the response, is like the beginning, the velocity at the beginning, and the damping is at the end. So the more friction is going to have at the end. And the higher this number, the less it's going to bounce. But the less this number, the more it's going to bounce at the end. Look at that. Like it's just a spring, basically. So you can definitely play with these values. Another thing that you need to understand about spring animation is that the more that it moves, the more it's going to bounce. So the fact that it moves from this much distance from the bottom to the top, that's why it's bouncing more. And those are things that you need to play with as a designer, as a developer who's getting into UI. But definitely have fun with this. And like I said, I'm going to share with you with the source code. This is fairly basic, but I think it goes over a lot of the fun stuff that you can do with SwiftUI in terms of layout, in terms of recreating something that you design in Figma, play with the animations. If you want to learn more about gestures and things like that, I'm going to create more live stream covering those things. You can also come to my handbooks and courses where I have a lot of tutorials that covers these more advanced techniques. So thank you very much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.